The room felt strange from the moment Sandra stepped inside. She had walked into many rehearsal rooms in her life, but this one felt different. It felt heavy, almost like the air itself carried a quiet secret. The script pages on the tables were untouched. The lights above had a soft, dull glow, and there was a deep silence that did not belong in a place filled with actors and ideas. Sandra looked around and found only one person inside. Keanu was sitting alone at the far end, his shoulders slightly lowered, his hands joined together, and his eyes fixed on a single spot on the floor. He did not look up when she entered, and that alone made her heart shift. Sandra walked toward him slowly, trying not to disturb whatever thought he was trapped inside. She had seen Keanu tired before. She had seen him thoughtful and quiet, but this was something else. This was the look of a man trying to hold himself together without letting anything slip. She pulled a chair beside him and waited. She did not speak. Sometimes silence spoke louder than words. At last he lifted his head and gave her a small smile, but the smile did not reach his eyes. It was a smile made for others, not a smile born from peace. This was the first hook for the viewer. Something was clearly wrong, but Keanu was trying to hide it, and Sandra could feel it. The viewers needed to stay because this mystery was only beginning. After a few seconds, Keanu whispered a soft greeting, but there was a wobble in his voice that only someone close to him would notice. Sandra heard it clearly. She leaned forward and asked if he was all right, keeping her tone gentle. He nodded, but his nod was too quick, too automatic. Sandra knew this kind of nod. It was the nod people used when they were not ready to explain their pain. The rehearsal started soon after. The director entered with the crew, unaware of the quiet moment between them. The room brightened with movement, but Keanu did not. When the scene began, Sandra kept one eye on the script and one eye on him. He was present, but not fully. Sometimes he paused in the middle of a line. Sometimes he stared at a mark on the floor as if he had forgotten where the scene was going. One moment he even skipped an entire part of the dialogue that he had rehearsed perfectly the day before. This was not like him. Keanu was known for staying focused even on difficult days. Sandra stepped in each time, adjusting the scene in a natural way so no one else would notice his mistakes. She guided him with her tone and movements, helping him stay inside the moment without letting the rest of the group see that he was struggling. Keanu looked at her once with deep gratitude in his eyes, but he quickly looked away, as if ashamed of needing help. There was conflict building quietly. This conflict was not loud or dramatic. It was the kind of inner struggle that makes viewers lean closer to their screens. The audience could sense that something was happening inside Keanu that he was trying hard to hide. The mystery grew stronger when the director called for a short break. As the break started, Keanu walked toward the exit with slow steps. His shoulders were tense. The world outside the door looked bright, but he looked like he was walking into a storm only he could see. The rest of the crew stayed inside talking about small things. Sandra watched him leave and felt a tug in her chest. Something told her not to let him face whatever he was facing alone. She took a deep breath and looked around. No one paid attention to her. Everyone was busy with their snacks and jokes. Sandra stood up and walked toward the small backstage kitchen. She opened a cabinet slowly, almost as if she was opening a memory. Inside were different tea boxes lined up neatly. She scanned each one until her fingers stopped on a specific box. It was the tea Keanu always drank on stressful days. He had mentioned it once without thinking, and she remembered. It was a simple detail, but it meant something to her now. She took the box out and boiled water. The sound of the kettle warming filled the tiny room with a soft echo. Sandra stood there quietly with her hands resting on the counter as the steam rose. She was not making tea for herself. She was making tea for someone who needed a moment of care even if he would never ask for it. She opened the packet carefully and placed it in a cup. When the water was ready, she poured it slowly, watching the light color spread through the water. While the tea cooled a little, Sandra thought about the years she had known Keanu. She had seen him help people without expecting anything in return. She had watched him comfort others even when he himself was hurting. She had always admired his calm nature, his patience, and his deep respect for everyone around him. But today she was seeing a side of him that he kept hidden from the world. And she understood something important. Even the strongest people can break quietly. Even the calmest souls can carry storms no one sees. And sometimes the smallest act of care can become the strongest support. The viewers would now feel even more connected. This scene carried emotion, depth, and an unspoken bond. It made the audience want to know what Keanu was hiding, why he was struggling, and what Sandra would do next. Just then the door opened without warning. Keanu stepped back into the kitchen with a tired breath. His eyes were darker now, like he had been fighting something outside. He stopped when he saw her standing there with the warm cup in her hands. The tea was steaming gently. Sandra froze for a second, not expecting him to return so soon. Keanu looked at her with a small surprise mixed with something softer, something fragile. She held the cup toward him. She was not sure if he would accept it. Maybe he wanted space. Maybe he would pretend he was fine, but he did not move forward. He just watched her. Watched the simple act she had done for him, watched the warmth in her eyes, watched the gentle way she held the cup as if offering peace. That was the moment the entire story began to shift. The silence in that room was no longer empty. It was full of meaning. Keanu's eyes softened slowly. He did not say anything. He did not reach for the tea yet. He just stood there watching her with deep gratitude that she had not expected to see. And Sandra understood that he needed this more than he could say. This was the emotional hook. This was the silent connection that kept viewers from clicking away. They wanted to know what Keanu was fighting. They wanted to know how this simple cup of tea would change everything. They wanted to see how this story of quiet care would unfold. The second part of the story begins with a deeper tension rising between silence and truth. The tea was still warm in Sandra's hands, and Keanu was still standing quietly at the doorway. He had not taken a single step toward her, but his eyes told a different story. His eyes were speaking the words he could not bring himself to say. There was exhaustion in them. There was heaviness. And there was a quiet kind of fear that he was trying very hard to hide. Sandra held the cup steady, waiting for him to move, but she did not rush him. She knew that sometimes the hardest step a person takes is the one where they let someone see their weakness. Finally, Keanu walked forward. He moved slowly, as if every step carried a memory he did not want to face. When he reached her, he looked at the tea again, almost surprised she had made it for him. He whispered a soft thank you, barely loud enough to hear, but the tone was real and full of emotion. He lifted the cup gently, like he was afraid it would break if he touched it too quickly. Sandra noticed how carefully he held it. She could tell this small act meant more to him than she expected. While he took a small sip, Sandra leaned against the counter. She did not ask him anything. She did not push him for answers. She simply watched him with kind eyes. She knew that forcing him to talk would only make him shut himself down further. Instead, she wanted him to feel safe enough to speak when he was ready. Keanu kept his head lowered as he held the cup. The steam rose softly, brushing against his face. For a moment, he closed his eyes as if the warmth helped him breathe again. There was a pulse of suspense here. Something inside him was trying to come out. He was fighting with himself, unsure of whether he should share the truth or keep it buried. Viewers watching this moment would feel their own breath slow down. They would sense that something big was on the edge of being revealed, but Keanu was not ready yet. After a few moments, he opened his eyes and tried to smile, but the smile faded quickly. Sandra stepped a little closer, just enough to show she was there without overwhelming him. Keanu finally placed the cup on the counter and whispered that he needed some air again. Sandra nodded softly, letting him go without question. Sometimes kindness means giving someone space even when you want to hold them there until they open up. Keanu stepped out of the kitchen and walked through the backstage hallway. His steps were slow and uneven. Sandra watched him leave, but something in her heart did not feel settled. She waited a few minutes, then quietly followed. She did not want to crowd him, but she wanted to make sure he was okay. She walked through the corridors until she found him standing near a back door that led outside. He was leaning against the wall with his head slightly lowered. His phone was in his hand, the screen still glowing. She took a careful step forward, not wanting to startle him. He did not turn around, but he spoke in a very soft voice, as if he knew she had come. He said he did not want to talk yet. Sandra told him she understood. She told him she was not there for answers. She was simply there so he would not stand alone while carrying something too heavy. This was the second emotional hook. The audience would feel the tension building gently, without loud drama. The quiet pain in Keanu's voice, the gentle patience in Sandra's presence, and the unresolved mystery behind his silence kept the viewers invested. After a long pause, Keanu finally lowered his phone and turned around to face her. There was a deep sadness in his eyes that Sandra had rarely seen. He looked like someone who was trying very hard not to break. He told her that he had received a message that morning. He said the message had shaken him. Sandra waited quietly. She knew better than to interrupt. He took a breath and said he had not told anyone else about it because he did not want to bring his personal pain into the rehearsal. But he did not say what the message was. He only said it came from someone he had not heard from in many years, someone who had once mattered to him deeply, someone from his past who now needed him. Sandra saw the conflict written all over his face. He was torn between wanting to be strong for the rehearsal and wanting to face something fragile inside him. Keanu told her he did not know how to deal with the message. He said it felt like a door he had closed long ago had suddenly opened again without warning. He was afraid of what might happen if he walked through it. The fear was not loud. It was quiet and personal. Sandra listened to him with full attention, letting him take as much time as he needed. He stopped speaking for a few seconds as if choosing his next words carefully. Then he said he felt guilty for being distracted that day. He said he should have been more focused, more present, more professional. Sandra shook her head gently and stepped closer. She told him that being human is not something to feel guilty about. She told him that he did not have to hide his pain just to appear strong. She placed her hand on his arm with a soft touch, letting him know she was there. This moment created another emotional beat that viewers would remember. The scene was simple but full of meaning. It showed vulnerability, trust, and quiet support. It was the kind of moment that makes people stay for the entire video because they want to see how this caring connection evolves. Sandra asked him if he wanted to talk more about the message, but he shook his head. He said he was not ready. He said that maybe later he could share it, but not yet. She respected that and told him that he could take all the time he needed. He looked at her again with that same deep gratitude she had seen in the kitchen. There was softness in his eyes now, a softness that came from being seen and understood. She told him she would stay with him until he felt steady again. Keanu nodded. He breathed deeper this time. He stood beside her in silence, but this silence felt different. This was not the silence of confusion or fear. This was the silence of someone slowly finding balance again because someone cared enough to stand beside them. After a few minutes, he lifted his head and said he wanted to return to the rehearsal room. He said he did not want to hold the team back. Sandra nodded and walked beside him. They stepped back into the building together. Keanu looked calmer, not completely fine, but calmer than before. The tea had helped. Sandra's quiet support had helped even more. He was ready to face the next scene, even if only one step at a time. And as they walked down the hallway, Sandra whispered something to him. She told him that whatever he was facing, he did not have to go through it alone. And Keanu looked at her with a look that held both relief and respect. The rehearsal room felt different when Sandra and Keanu walked back in together. The crew was scattered around, chatting lightly, unaware of the emotional storm Keanu had just stepped through. Only Sandra knew how heavy his heart was. Only she had seen the quiet fear hiding behind his tired smile. But she stayed close to him, keeping her presence gentle and steady, like a soft anchor pulling him back to the moment. Keanu picked up his script again. He held it with both hands, but Sandra noticed the subtle tremble in his fingers. He took a deep breath and tried to reset himself. The director called for the next scene. It was supposed to be an emotional exchange between their characters, a scene filled with trust and hidden vulnerability. The irony of the moment was not lost on Sandra. The emotions on the page mirrored the emotions in Keanu's eyes. The hook for the viewers began here. The scene they were about to rehearse would blend real emotion with scripted emotion, and the audience would feel the tension rise between truth and performance. As they stepped onto their marks, Sandra noticed Keanu's gaze drifting again. His eyes shifted to the floor for a second, then to the window, as if his mind was still holding onto that unreadable message from earlier. When the director said action, Sandra took the lead, guiding the scene with calm confidence. She delivered her lines with softness, giving Keanu room to breathe and find his rhythm again. But halfway through the scene, Keanu froze. It happened so quickly that even the director did not catch it at first. One moment he was speaking, the next moment he went silent. His entire body stiffened. His eyes widened not in fear but in deep distraction, as if something inside him had knocked him off balance again. Sandra reacted immediately. She stepped closer in character, using her next line to gently cover his pause. She gave him a soft cue with her tone, encouraging him to continue. For a moment it worked. Keanu blinked, caught the thread, and delivered his next line. But his voice wavered. His words were softer, slower, almost fragile. The director paused the scene and asked if everything was all right. Before Keanu could answer, Sandra quickly stepped in and said they just needed 1 minute. She knew Keanu would blame himself if the director thought something was wrong. She wanted to shield him from that. She placed a hand on his back and guided him a few steps away from the set. Keanu whispered that he was trying. He said he wanted to stay focused, but the message from earlier kept pulling him back into memories he thought he had buried. He looked tired in a way that no camera could hide. Sandra told him softly that he did not have to push himself that hard. She reminded him that everyone has moments when life interrupts work. She said there was no shame in feeling overwhelmed. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment and took a slow breath. The weight on his shoulders was visible, even in the slight curve of his back. Here the second emotional hook emerged for viewers. Something from Keanu's past was haunting him, something deep enough to shake his calm. The audience would want to know what this message was and why it affected him so strongly. As they stood there in the quiet corner, a crew assistant walked by and placed a stack of props on a nearby table. One of the props slipped and fell onto the floor with a loud thud. The sudden sound made Keanu flinch hard, almost too hard. Sandra noticed it immediately. It was not the normal flinch of surprise. It was the flinch of someone whose mind was already overwhelmed, someone close to breaking. Sandra stepped even closer. She placed her hand gently on his arm and told him that he did not have to explain anything yet. She told him she trusted him. She told him she believed in him. Hearing those words seemed to steady him a little. He nodded slowly, his breathing finally settling. After a moment, Keanu said something unexpected. He whispered that he was ashamed. Sandra frowned softly and asked why. He said he felt weak for letting a message shake him this deeply. He said he felt like he should be stronger, especially in front of people who looked up to him. Sandra shook her head. She told him that true strength is not pretending nothing hurts. True strength is facing the pain, even when it scares you. Keanu stared at her with a quiet disbelief, as if her words were something he did not expect to hear that day. Then he whispered something even softer. He said he did not want to cry in front of anyone. Sandra smiled gently and told him that it would not make him any less strong if he did. She told him she would not think any less of him. She told him she would not walk away. These words settled in him like warm light. After a few moments, he straightened. He picked up his script again and told her he wanted to try the scene one more time. She nodded and walked beside him back to the set. The director asked if everything was good now. Sandra said yes with full confidence. Keanu gave a small nod, still quiet but more centered. They began again. This time Keanu's delivery was different. It was not perfect, but it was honest. His lines carried a depth that no rehearsal had produced before. The emotions in his voice were not coming from the script. They were coming from whatever pain he was still holding inside. And Sandra matched him perfectly, adjusting her tone and timing to support him without overpowering him. Their acting became so real, so raw, that the entire crew fell silent as they watched. The director did not call cut immediately, even after the scene ended. He let the moment sit in the air because he knew something powerful had just happened. When he finally said cut, the crew quietly applauded, sensing the magic of the moment. Keanu looked down, almost embarrassed by the attention. Sandra leaned close and whispered that he did great. He looked at her with tired eyes but a small, grateful smile. It was the kind of smile that said he was still hurting, but he felt supported. After the applause faded, the director gave them a longer break. Keanu placed his script on the table and stepped away again. This time Sandra followed without hesitation. She found him standing in the hallway looking at his phone again. He held it like it carried something heavy inside it. He whispered that the person who messaged him wanted to meet him, and then he added something more. He said he did not know if he was ready. This moment created the biggest suspense so far. Who wanted to meet him? Why did the message shake him so deeply? Why was he afraid to face it? Sandra placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and told him that when he was ready to share more, she would listen. She told him she would not judge him, and she told him something that made his eyes soften again. She said he did not have to go through any of this alone. Keanu took a deep breath, looked at the floor for a moment, then looked back at her. He whispered that he would tell her everything, but not now, later. And she nodded with quiet understanding. The hallway outside the rehearsal room felt colder than before. The quiet hum of distant voices echoed through the space, but Keanu stood still, holding his phone like it carried the weight of 1,000 memories. Sandra stayed beside him, not too close, not too far, giving him the space he needed, but also the comfort he was clearly afraid to ask for. The suspense grew here. Viewers would feel the tension of an unanswered message and the mystery of a past returning at the worst possible moment. Keanu finally slipped his phone back into his pocket and straightened his posture, trying to gather the strength he had lost. He whispered that they should get back inside before the crew started worrying. Sandra nodded, though she knew very well that his mind was not in the rehearsal room anymore. But she respected his effort. She admired that he was still trying to carry himself with dignity even when his heart was so clearly shaking. As they walked back in, the director announced that the next scene involved a quiet, emotional exchange on a sofa set. Sandra and Keanu took their positions. The set lights dimmed gently, and the soft glow created a calm atmosphere that contrasted with Keanu's inner unrest. The scene was about two characters finally trusting each other with their fears. The irony of the moment touched Sandra again. The script seemed to be mirroring their real lives with uncanny accuracy. When the director said action, Sandra delivered her lines with steady emotional warmth. She gave space for Keanu to find his rhythm. But when Keanu attempted to speak, his voice cracked slightly. It was so subtle that the director did not notice, but Sandra did. She saw the slight tension in his jaw, the way he avoided eye contact, the way his breathing faltered for half a second. Keanu forced himself through the next lines, but the tremble in his voice made the scene unexpectedly powerful. It was not acting anymore. It was real emotion bleeding into the performance. Sandra responded naturally, bringing her character closer to his in a gentle way that shielded him from breaking. The director looked amazed. He believed he was witnessing raw acting talent, but Sandra knew better. She knew this emotion came from a place much deeper. The director called cut, praising them for the authenticity in their performance. The crew nodded in agreement, but Sandra's eyes stayed on Keanu. She saw him exhale in a shaky way, as if that scene had drained him more than he expected. She stepped toward him slowly, letting the noise of the room fade behind them. She asked him softly if he was okay. Keanu nodded again, but his nod was once more too quick, too polished, too practiced. It was the kind of nod people use when they want to protect others from their own pain. Sandra placed her hand gently on his arm. She reminded him that he did not owe her a performance. He looked at her with tired eyes, and for a moment it felt like he was about to speak, about to confess something he had been holding inside since morning. But before he could say anything, a crew member rushed over to them. He had a clipboard in his hand and a worried expression on his face. He told Keanu that there was someone waiting for him outside, someone who said it was urgent, someone who said he would understand why they were there. Keanu froze. Everything around him went blurry for a moment. The voices in the room faded into a soft echo, his breath caught in his chest. Sandra saw all of this. She saw the shock hit him like a wave. She stepped closer, almost instinctively, ready to steady him if he fell apart. The crew member pointed toward the side exit and told Keanu that the person was waiting near the back parking area. Keanu's chest tightened. Sandra saw it clearly. She asked him softly if he wanted her to come with him. He did not answer right away. He looked at the floor, then at the exit, then finally at her. He whispered yes. That one word held fear, sadness, and trust all at once. It was the moment viewers would lean forward in their seats. This was the emotional twist they had been waiting for. They walked together through the long backstage corridor. Each step echoed off the walls, and the lights above seemed dimmer, creating a suspenseful tunnel of soft shadows. Keanu's hands were clenched. His breathing was uneven. Sandra stayed close, matching his pace, keeping her presence steady like a gentle guide. When they finally reached the back exit, Keanu paused. He placed his hand on the door but did not open it. His shoulders shook slightly. Sandra placed her hand softly on his back and told him she was with him. He nodded. It took him a moment, but he slowly pushed the door open. The cold outdoor air hit them first. Then they saw a figure standing near the far end of the parking area. The figure was facing away from them, shoulders slightly hunched, hands clasped in front. Something about the posture felt familiar but painful. Keanu's breathing stopped for a full second. The figure turned slowly. It was an older man. His face carried exhaustion and a sadness that looked like it had aged him quickly. His eyes met Keanu's, and in that moment Sandra understood everything. She saw recognition flash through Keanu's expression. She saw the shock. She saw the heartbreak. This was no stranger. This was someone Keanu once loved deeply, someone he once trusted, someone who had disappeared from his life without warning many years ago. Keanu whispered the man's name under his breath. Sandra heard it. The man stepped forward slowly, as if he was afraid to break whatever fragile air existed between them. Keanu took one unsteady step back. The man whispered that he was sorry. His voice cracked as he said it. He said he had come because he had no one left to turn to, that he was sick, that he wanted to fix things before it was too late. Sandra watched Keanu tremble. She saw the pain in his eyes. She saw the old sadness rise from deep inside him like a shadow returning to the surface, and she understood why that message had broken him earlier. She moved closer to him, letting her presence anchor him. She whispered in a voice only he could hear. She said he did not have to face this alone. He turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes. His own eyes were wet now. And for the first time that day, he let himself breathe. The cold air wrapped around the three of them, but the real chill came from the silence. Keanu stood frozen, staring at the man who had once shaped a large part of his past. The parking area around them was empty and quiet. Only a distant humming sound filled the space, and even that seemed to fade as the truth between Keanu and the man slowly settled into the moment. Sandra felt the tension rise, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy and deep enough to make the viewer hold their breath. The man took another step toward Keanu. Sandra noticed the man's frail shoulders and unsteady breathing. He looked like someone who had rushed through years of regret and finally reached the moment he feared and needed the most. He repeated softly that he was sorry. He said he knew he had no right to show up after so long, not after the pain he had caused, not after the silence he had left behind. Keanu's jaw tightened. He looked at the ground, fighting for control. Sandra saw his hands trembling slightly. She took a slow breath and moved a little closer to him, not touching him yet, but standing close enough for him to feel her presence. Keanu lifted his eyes again, meeting the man's gaze with a mixture of shock, hurt, and confusion. "Why now?" Keanu whispered, his voice barely holding together. "Why after all these years?" The man swallowed hard and looked down, unable to hold Keanu's eyes for too long. He explained that he had been sick for some time. He said the doctors had given him news he could not ignore. His voice cracked as he said he did not want to leave the world with unfinished wounds. He said he wanted to fix what he broke. Keanu took a small step back, struggling to keep his balance. The emotional hit was too strong. The viewers at this point would feel the intensity of his internal conflict. This was the twist they had been waiting for. This was the core of Keanu's earlier pain. Keanu whispered that he did not know if he could forgive him. His voice was soft but filled with years of suppressed hurt. He reminded the man that he had waited for answers that never came, that he had tried to reach out and heard nothing, that the silence had cut deeper than any spoken word could. He said he had spent years trying to understand why everything fell apart without explanation. The man lowered his head with shame. He admitted that he had been afraid. He said he had made mistakes, choices he could not undo. He said he did not come asking for forgiveness. He came because he wanted to give Keanu the truth before time ran out. Keanu blinked slowly, the pain twisting inside him. He turned his face away, trying to protect himself from the flood of emotion rising in his chest. Sandra stepped beside him fully now. She placed a gentle hand on his back, steadying him with the calmness she carried like a quiet strength. Keanu leaned slightly toward her, a sign he had reached a point where he needed support more than he wanted to pretend he was all right. The man continued speaking, telling him that he had run from his own guilt, that he had believed disappearing was easier than facing the reality of what he had broken. He said he now understood the damage he caused. He said he lived with that regret every day. Keanu closed his eyes as if fighting memories that came rushing back. Sandra felt the movement of his breath and the quiet tremor in his chest. She whispered gently that he did not have to decide anything right now. The words seemed to reach him through the noise of his thoughts. He took a deeper breath, grounding himself. The man stepped forward again, slowly. He told Keanu that he had written him a letter years ago but never gathered the courage to send it. He said he had kept it with him all this time. He reached into his coat pocket with shaky fingers and pulled out a folded envelope. Sandra watched the moment carefully. Keanu stared at the envelope, unsure, afraid of reopening wounds he had closed with difficulty. After a painful pause, the man held the envelope toward him. The silence stretched between them like a fragile thread. Keanu hesitated, then slowly reached for it. His fingers brushed the man's hand, and Sandra saw the emotional spark in that brief touch. It was the spark of broken history trying to heal itself. Keanu held the envelope, but he did not open it. He looked at the man with eyes full of layered emotions. He whispered that he did not promise forgiveness. He said he did not know if he could forgive. He said he did not know if the pain would fade. But he also said something that made the man's eyes fill with tears. He said he was willing to listen. This simple sentence carried more weight than forgiveness. It was a door opening again, not fully, but enough for a sliver of light to enter. The man lowered his head, overcome with gratitude. He whispered thank you, barely able to speak. Keanu stepped back, overwhelmed. Sandra gently moved in front of him to block the cold breeze. She placed both her hands on his arms now. She looked into his eyes with a calm that held no judgment. She told him softly that he had done something incredibly brave. She told him that facing someone who had hurt him took real courage. She told him that pain does not disappear in a moment, but taking the first step mattered. Keanu nodded slightly, still breathing unevenly. Sandra wrapped her arm around his back and guided him away from the man, giving Keanu the space he needed to breathe. They walked a few steps away while the man stood still, watching with tears in his eyes. Sandra walked Keanu to a quiet area near a bench. She helped him sit down slowly. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head lowered. Sandra stayed right beside him, her presence warm and steady. She asked gently if he wanted to talk. He shook his head. Not yet. She respected that. She simply placed her hand over his, giving him something steady to hold on to. After a moment, he squeezed her hand back, very softly, but enough to show that he needed that connection. The scene deepened with emotional texture. Viewers would feel the quiet bond between them growing stronger with each breath, each unspoken word, each gentle touch. After a long silence, Keanu whispered that he did not understand why it still hurt so much. Sandra told him that old pain never disappears easily. She said it takes time, patience, and kindness to heal something that deep. She said he did not have to rush forgiveness or answers. He just had to honor his emotions honestly. Keanu lifted his head slowly. His eyes were moist but steady now. He looked at Sandra with a gaze full of quiet gratitude, a gratitude deeper than words. He whispered that he was glad she was there. He said he might not have faced this moment without her. Sandra smiled gently and told him that he never had to carry anything alone. Not anymore. The soft breeze moved across the quiet parking area as Sandra and Keanu sat together on the bench. The weight of the moment had not disappeared, but something inside Keanu had shifted. His breathing was steadier. The storm inside him, though still present, had softened enough for him to think, to feel, and to accept the truth that had finally arrived at his doorstep. Sandra stayed close, her presence gentle and grounding. She did not rush him, and she did not fill the silence with unnecessary words. She simply stayed beside him, letting him know he was not alone. Keanu held the envelope the man had given him. The paper felt old, fragile, and warm from his hands. He turned it slowly, staring at his name written in the familiar handwriting he had not seen in years. He hesitated to open it. The letter represented a part of his life he had buried deeply, a part that still held pain. Sandra noticed the tension in his fingers and placed her hand over his. Her touch was light, but it carried reassurance. She whispered softly that he did not have to read it now. He could read it whenever his heart felt ready. Keanu nodded. He slipped the letter into his jacket pocket and leaned back against the bench, staring at the sky. The clouds were moving slowly, almost peacefully, as if the world outside had no idea of the emotional battle he had just faced. Sandra leaned back beside him. She allowed the quiet moment to fill the space between them, giving him room to breathe. After a few minutes, Keanu spoke again. His voice was soft but more balanced. He told Sandra that he never expected to see the man again. He said he had convinced himself that their story had ended long ago. Seeing him again today had reopened wounds he thought were closed. Sandra listened with complete attention. She told him that facing old pain is one of the hardest things anyone can do. She reminded him that he had acted with dignity and strength, even when his heart was shaking. Keanu turned his head slightly toward her. He whispered that he did not feel strong. He said he felt confused, scared, and tired. Sandra shook her head gently. She told him that strength is not the absence of fear. Strength is doing what is right even when fear tries to stop you. She told him that he had shown real courage today and he should not doubt that. Her words steadied him. He looked into her eyes, and for a moment there was a deep silence between them. Not an empty silence, but a meaningful one. A silence that held understanding, respect, and a quiet connection that had grown stronger over the course of the day. After some time, they both stood up from the bench. Keanu took a slow breath. Sandra asked him softly if he wanted to go back to the rehearsal room. He hesitated but nodded. She walked beside him, matching her steps with his, making sure he did not feel alone. As they approached the parking area again, they saw the man still standing there, waiting. He looked unsure of whether he should stay or go. Keanu stopped walking for a moment. Sandra stood beside him without speaking. He took a breath and walked forward alone. The man looked at him with hopeful, fearful eyes. Keanu held up his hand slightly, signaling him to wait before speaking. Silence stretched between them again. Keanu told him that he needed time. He said he could not give answers today. He said his heart needed space to process everything. The man nodded, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. Keanu told him that he did not know what would happen next, but he did not want to leave things in anger. He said he was willing to try. The man wiped his eyes and whispered that he understood. He thanked Keanu for listening. He thanked him for giving him a chance to speak. He said he did not expect forgiveness, but was grateful for hope. Keanu gave a slow nod. Then he stepped back. Sandra returned to his side, her presence once again steadying him. Together, they watched the man walk away with slow steps, as if each step carried guilt, regret, and a fragile hope for healing. Once the man disappeared from sight, Keanu let out a long breath. He turned to Sandra, and this time he offered her a small smile, a real one, soft, warm, and full of gratitude. Sandra returned the smile. She brushed her hand lightly along his arm, a simple gesture that said she was proud of him. They walked back inside the building. The noise of the crew and the bright lights felt different now. Lighter, calmer. The tension that had wrapped around Keanu's heart had loosened. Sandra guided him toward the small backstage kitchen. She gently nudged him toward a chair and handed him a warm cup of tea. The same tea she had made for him hours earlier. The tea that had started this quiet journey of care. Keanu held the cup gently, almost reverently. He looked at her again, and this time his eyes held a softness that carried deep meaning. He whispered a soft thank you. Sandra asked him what he was thanking her for. He said he was thanking her for the tea, for standing beside him, for helping him stay steady, for being there when he needed someone the most. Sandra smiled and told him that caring for someone is not something that should be questioned. She told him that he would have done the same for her without hesitation. He nodded. He knew she was right. Keanu took a sip of the tea. The warmth spread through him like a quiet comfort. He looked at Sandra again, his eyes filled with calm gratitude. Sandra sat beside him, resting her hands on the table in front of her. They stayed like that for a moment, watching the soft steam rise from the cup between them. The final emotional beat came here, the moment that would stay with viewers, the moment that showed how simple kindness can change everything. Keanu whispered that he felt lighter. He said the pain was still there, but it no longer felt unbearable. Sandra told him that pain becomes lighter when shared with someone who cares. She told him that he did not need to hide from his emotions. She told him that healing often begins with honesty and gentle support. Keanu nodded slowly. He looked at Sandra with deep appreciation in his eyes. He said she had been his strength today. He said he would never forget how she stood beside him when he almost lost control. Sandra touched his hand gently. She told him he did not have to thank her for kindness. She told him that people deserve care, especially when they do not ask for it. The story closed with this moment, simple, human, and filled with quiet respect. Keanu lifted the warm cup again. He watched her with gratitude. She smiled back with kindness. And in that moment, two hearts stood steady together in silence, proving that sometimes the smallest act of care can save someone from the storm inside them.